it's nothing compared to the approach of UK student housing. And UK student housing, some operators take it too seriously because it's too pastoral, too university like, too focused on making everything perfectly safe at all times.
Whether you're developing a new student housing community or acquiring an existing one, fast and reliable internet isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. But when it comes to serving college students, standard telco providers often fall short on both performance and support. Don't risk a frustrating experience for you and your residents. Choose Campus Technologies, a provider with nearly 25 years of expertise in delivering top-tier internet infrastructure and exceptional customer service for student housing nationwide. Beyond high-speed wired and wireless internet, Campus Technologies also offers managed IT services to keep your property management team running smoothly at their properties. Even if you're not currently in the market for a provider, you need to know the best practices for upgrading your property's internet infrastructure. Download their latest white paper today. You can find the link in the show notes or visit campustechnologies.com. Welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, where we are putting you in touch with the people who bring student housing to life. I'm your host, Wes Deese. I'm also the CEO of Student Housing Insight. This is your first time running across Student Housing Insight. We are a platform for off-campus student housing professionals to network, share ideas, as well as data. You can find more information about our platform at studenthousinginsight.com. Again, that's studenthousinginsight.com. We'll also put that link in our show notes. In addition to this podcast, we also host the industry's monthly webinar for the U.S. called Shop Talk, and SHOP stands for Student Housing Operations. So you can imagine a good bit of what we talk about there. But each month, we provide legislative and policy updates that are impacting our industry. Shop Talk also provides a monthly overview of pre-leasing data on a national and a regional basis, along with a panel of operators who provide their on-the-ground observations. And we also typically provide a topic of the month as well. So a lot of great information. And if you are involved with the operations of student housing, specifically in the U.S., I think if you're in Canada and maybe some other countries, you'll get a lot out of it as well. But you should be registered to receive our monthly invites for Shop Talk. You can do that as well as review prior Shop Talk webinars by going to shoptalk.info. Again, that's shoptalk.info, and we'll also provide that link in the show notes. Well, guys, this is our next installment for our profiles in student housing, where we sit down with a student housing veteran and kind of talk about their journey within the industry and things that they're working on, and really just to try to provide, for those that are a little bit newer in the industry, or maybe, folks that are just beginning their career, and maybe this is the first industry that they've ever worked in, kind of give them some of the background on how this industry has evolved, and also kind of, shine a little bit of light on what opportunities are available within the industry. And I got to tell you, today's guest is kind of the perfect person to kind of put on a pedestal and talk about what all they have been exposed to in this industry. And that is Matt Walker with Mapletree Investments. And he's one of the few people, maybe the only, I have to think about that, but it's one of the few people that I've been able to follow throughout their career that's gone from strictly being operations, started out on site and within student housing, has stayed solely in student housing, and is now on the investment side. And that in and of itself is certainly a huge feat to do. And, that those type of people are very interesting to me already. But on top of that, his career has taken him to South America. And I don't mean he just went there for a consulting job or a consulting assignment, but he actually moved there and helped CA Ventures when they were launching their international operations platform. And that also ended up taking him to London, where he lives now. And eventually, that's how he became involved with Mapletree and working with them. And he's still in London today, and got to see him back at Interface in April down in Austin, Texas. And it was great to catch up with him. And I told him then, Matt, we've got to get you on the podcast and talk about your experiences. And so we were able to set some time, to do a remote call and have that interview. We talked for an entire hour and a half. So I'm going to tell you, this is a long one, but this is one that's really good and hits on so many things that have happened in student housing over the past 2 decades. And so if you like hearing some of that history and how some of the people are all connected within the industry, you're going to get that. And if you're someone who you've been in this industry for 4 or 5 years, you're trying to really kind of determine if this is going to be something that's going to open other doors for you and really become a career for you, this is a perfect episode for you to get an understanding of, one, how to set yourself in a place to take advantage of those opportunities, but then also just kind of really understand, what it is that the type of mindset that you've got to have in order to execute on those as well. So with that being said, here's my interview with Matt Walker. Matt Walker, welcome to the podcast.
Hi. I'm glad to be here, Wes. Thanks for having me. We talked about this several times, and it's the first time coming on.
Well, it's so crazy. I was thinking earlier today, kind of preparing for this on how we originally met. I remember it was pretty early in my consulting career, and I got this random call from a group in South America that was like, "Hey, we're thinking about doing something at our local university. We've never done any student housing. Would you be willing to come down here?" And I'm like, I don't know anything about South American universities. And, I was talking to a couple of folks. I think it was actually Nancy Giles, who's, a big recruiter in the space. Mm-hmm. And she was like, he really ought to talk to Matt Walker. And so she put us in touch with each other, and you were gracious enough to give me some of your time and give me some of your insight, because you were living in South America. I can't remember exactly which country it was at the time. And now you're in London. It's been a very interesting career that you've had in student housing, and I so want to just kind of get that on record as to what this journey has been like for you, because I think there's a lot of folks in our audience that listen to the podcast that are earlier in their careers from an operations standpoint, and they just don't realize how many doors are actually open to them to do some really unique things. So thanks so much for sparing some time for us to capture that story.
Really glad to be here, and I'm happy to open some of those doors, hopefully, or at least show them where they're at.
So I want to talk about the journey. Let's talk about where you're at today. You're pretty much leading everything up from a global initiative with Mapletree Investments for student housing. You want to talk a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like in your current position?
Yeah. It's a cool place to be. Mapletree is a Singapore-based business, really huge business, and we've got all kinds of different properties. We've got logistics properties and office buildings and student housing and data centers in a bunch of different places in the world, Australia to Asia to Europe to North America. So really all over the place. And I do lead up the student housing business for Mapletree. I've been here. I'll be 2 years next week, actually, about to be anniversary time. And my day to day is quite far removed from how I got started. So I'm in charge of everything from the investment side of our business to operations, where we self-operate and do property management here in the UK across the vast majority of our properties. And it's really cool to be in a place where you can look for investment opportunities in different countries. we just closed on our first deal in Australia last month, so it's cool to learn about a new market that
Yeah.
up to this point I still haven't worked in until now. And we're exploring investments in other places like Hong Kong. So it's super cool to be exposed to that side of the business in a leadership position and running that part. Everything down to running funds that we raised well before I was at Mapletree, but are still live funds that we need to talk with investors and answer questions and figure out a way to sell those properties at the right return at the right time. And still important to do sales and marketing, and still important to focus on maintenance and preventive contracts. All that stuff's still important no matter what you do, and how big your business is.
So let's go back to the beginning. And even before student housing, but what's a little bit of background on, kind of where you grew up and what kind of formed, your kind of outlook on things. And then let's talk about how that intersected with student housing.
Yeah, like a lot of people, I had no intention to be doing student housing as a career. I know that's not really unique in our sector, because people tend to fall into it by being RAs on campus or getting a college job, and I'm exactly like that. So I know that's not unique, but maybe the rest of my career path has been a little bit. But I started from Oklahoma. I grew up on a cattle ranch, pig farm type of place. I mean, it was
Wow.
1,000 acres. It was an awesome growing up experience, but really, really rural. I originally wanted to be a meteorologist. I mean, being from Oklahoma, tornado alley, all that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So it makes sense. But that took me to the University of Oklahoma, where I got my undergrad degree, and I got a college job at the property I worked at. As I was going through school, and even then, I'd switched my major at that point. At that point, I was doing political science, thinking I'm going to be a lawyer. That's what I'll do. And graduated in the midst of the global financial crisis and the recession.
Yeah.
And by that point, I had become the full-time leasing and marketing manager at the property I was working at in Norman. And if you had a good, well-paying job with benefits full-time in 2008 as a freshly graduated, person out of college, you didn't leave that job
Yeah.
in 2008.
What's
So
so
I
funny,
didn't.
I'm going to park you there for just 1 second, because I'm sure our paths probably crossed. Because the company I was working for at the time, I was their VP of property management, but we also did the whole kitty condo thing, right? You buy a 4-bedroom condo, you rent out the other 3 bedrooms. And we had just finished up the Edge at Norman condominiums. And it was right at that, on the tail end of the economic crisis, or whatever you want to call it. And, all of a sudden, we had an inventory, I think, of 36 condos, and we'd done a fantastic job selling those to not only students and their parents, but also investors. It was nothing for somebody to come in from Dallas that, wanted to buy 5-6 units. And then all of a sudden, when everything pretty much crashed from a credit standpoint, that it just wasn't available. So we had this inventory, and we're like, what are we going to do with it? And we're like, we've got to lease it out. And so I was spending a lot of time in Norman in 2009, 2010, putting furniture packages together and all that, so that we could lease it out for the next year. And we had no problem leasing it out. So I'm sure our paths probably crossed at that.
I'm sure. Yeah, I remember when that property was under construction, and I remember it well. I started at the Reserve on Stinson. It was an EDR property, and so I got started with EDR started as a CA, and I was a CA for something like a community assistant. I know it's still common role across the U.S. student housing industry. Did that for a couple of years before I started moving up into management. So got started at the lowest ground level.
Wasn't that one of the properties that, so if you remember Hurricane Katrina, it's about that same, time or whatever, that ended up, I guess it was several years. It may have been, when was Katrina?
Katrina, like 2005, I think. I think it's his 20th anniversary this year, I think.
Yeah, it seems like it was that property that, everything moved out of New Orleans, including the sports teams. And this was before Oklahoma Thunder, had expanded. And so the New Orleans, I guess they were the Hornets at the time, had moved to Oklahoma. but all the players and everybody that was associated with the Hornets was actually living at one of the student properties. I feel like it was that property,
It
but
might have been. I think I moved in I think January 2006, so I probably would have missed it by
yeah,
a little bit. It might have been that property. It would have been brand new at the time. I think it delivered out of construction in 2005, so they may well have tried to stabilize quick by grabbing some of that kind of occupancy.
yeah. One of my neighbors he was their PR guy, and he was with the Hornets when they were in Charlotte. Moved with them to New Orleans, lost their home and everything in Katrina. He ended up coming back and working for the NBA in Charlotte. And when we met each other, mentioned that I was in student housing. He's like, "Oh, I know all about student housing." And it was because he had to live in one of those properties.
Right, man.
during that year.
That was really good for Oklahoma City, because that directly led to the Thunder moving to town from Seattle. So that was sort of the dry run.
Yeah. But anyway, just wanted to kind of double click on the Norman connection there. So please go ahead with the rest of the story.
No, it's quite okay. So I mean, I was at that property for a number of years, and I really think that that's very useful. And I've tried to use that template as I've gone through my career. That it's important to spend 2-3 years in a place or in a role to really understand it in and out. Bare minimum. Some people do it for 5-10 years, but
Yeah.
I think and as I've answered questions where people have asked me to give them advice on a career in the past, I've said, don't try to job hop too fast. Learn the job really well, all the ins and outs before you move to the next thing, or you're shortchanging yourself. It's not just about a salary. So I was there for a handful of years, and as I mentioned, I graduated, still working there, kept doing it, which is sometimes a little scary, because you see your peers, your friends, your buddies from college, they're doing other things. They're going to grad school or going to law school. They're getting other jobs and moving on, and you're still in your college town. So that's not always the most fun experience. But I know that quite a lot of people doing what we do have been there, still working in their hometown or their college town. And I really didn't know what I was going to do. I'd gotten a poli-sci degree with the intention to go to law school. And at that time, I thought, I don't really want to be an attorney. I want to go be a lobbyist in DC and advocate for causes that I think are important, hopefully make some good money along the way. But I wasn't super passionate about that. I didn't really know. And I think that's important for your audience to hear. You don't have to have a really, black and white designed pathway of exactly how your career will look. I was always a really good student in high school and coming up through. I was a good student at university and college, but I didn't know ever what I really wanted to do, which is why I changed my major and graduated not knowing what I wanted to do. And I still had a really a great career so far. So I don't think that lack of clarity of 12 years old and I want to be a hand surgeon. You don't need to know that. Going through your upbringing and through your education, you can still be really successful, as long as you're open-minded. And I think that's the thing that at that point, and then even since, that has benefited me the most is be open to ideas, be open to opportunities, work hard, get noticed for your work ethic, not through politicking, not through schmoozing the bosses or being too overt and putting yourself in the right place. Because if you just work hard, you do your job to the best of your ability, and you're open-minded to the next step and what that might look like, more doors will open. So for me, that happened. That happened when a property manager in Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas, that role opened up. A community manager job opened up, and it was a big property. It was 700 plus beds. It wasn't really that old at the time, but it was about 10 years old. So it was built in the sort of mid 90s and hadn't been very well cared for. So it had a lot of work. The occupancy wasn't great. Needed a lot of capex put into it. And they asked me, "Hey, you want to move to Kansas to run this property?" And initially, I was like, "I've thought about wanting to, move away from home and leave Oklahoma, but I didn't expect Kansas to be my destination. It was just next door. I thought maybe like California or Colorado, or something a little bit more glamorous." But they said, "Well, don't worry, we'll send you out, let you go check out the town, and you can make your decision then." So I drove up, and Lawrence is an amazing little college town. It's super cool. And so I immediately was like, yeah, let's do this. I'll move up and do it. But being a small town kid, from a farming community, really close knit, lots of family around. That was the first time moving away from family. Norman is only about an hour from where I grew up, so it was always super easy to get home and
Yeah.
see my family as often as I wanted. And moving to Lawrence was like 5-6 hour drive away, so that was a big leap of faith. But I said yes. I don't know if this is going to be a career or not. At that time, I didn't think so. I thought
Yeah.
this was a job, not a
Yeah.
career, and it's another job. It's going to pay better. It's something new and exciting, but it's still just a job. But I went up and did that, and that was
I gotta
an
ask,
incredible
because
challenge.
I think a lot of folks take that when they don't know, maybe they know they've got to go get a master's or work on a PhD. Did you go with Lawrence thinking maybe you'll become a Jayhawk and take master's courses, or was that something just wasn't on your radar?
I don't think it was on my mind initially. I had just finished school and I had put my heart and soul into being like a really good student. I graduated with honors from OU, and I just tried my best to be an exceptional student. And I was really one of the reasons why I didn't immediately go to law school, which is something that's super common to do when the job market's tough. It's sort of a fundamental aspect of our sector is that people stay at school when the economy is tough. I didn't want to do that because I was so sick of school. I feel like I'd
Yeah.
been, in education and driven to perform in school for my whole life, and I was just ready to do something, just work for a little while.
Yeah.
So when I moved to Lawrence, I didn't initially think that, but and I certainly didn't think I'd become a Jayhawk because I'm a Sooner. I'm a Sooner through and through. I love my Oklahoma Sooners, even from over here in London. I watch my football whenever I can. Last weekend, I stayed up late to watch it. If they kick off at 1 in the morning, that's a bridge too far sometimes for me to stay up literally all night. But whenever I can, I watch. So no, I was never going to become a Jayhawk. But after a year or so of being up there, I did appreciate that I was running a property now. We were doing a multi-million-dollar CapEx refurb rehab program on that property.
Okay.
And I was learning a lot of things. I distinctly remember when I first moved there, being told, well, you got to do your accruals this month, and having no idea what accruals were. Had no clue. I'd never heard the term before in my life because I had never taken a business class. I was a social sciences major of being poli sci. I'd
Yeah.
never taken a business class, an accounting class, a finance class, nothing. And I had a lot of good managers around me. I had a manager come over from Columbia, Missouri, and train me up on that sort of thing. So I had lots of people around me, which is extremely common in student housing. This is what we do. These
Yeah.
portfolio teams support each other and train each other up. And I had that at EDR at the time. And but it was apparent, if you're going to make this a career, you're going to need to know, I think, more about business than
Yeah.
And so I decided after a year of being up there that I'll get an MBA. And so I took the GMAT and applied to the KU Business School, and I got in. And I started, though I was taking classes in the Kansas City area campus, which is about
Hmm.
a 45-minute drive from Lawrence, even though I live right next to campus. So it was
Yeah.
not really on the Lawrence campus. And around that time, EDR was making a big acquisition in Fort Worth, and it was going to be their biggest NOI generator across the whole property. And
Okay.
Chris Richards, who is really well known in this
Yeah.
sector, called up and said, if we close on this property in a few months, do you want to move down there and run that property for us? I thought, well, that's even closer to family. It's a bigger
Yeah.
city, more cosmopolitan in the DFW Metroplex. So, and it's going to be a flagship property for EDR. Yeah, why not? I'll definitely do that. And it essentially cost me a year's worth of MBA program because most of the credits in a program like that don't transfer. But
Okay.
I did it anyway because I think it goes to this point I made earlier. It's like a door opened. It would have been really easy to say no because I
Yeah.
was halfway through an MBA program. I'd only been living in Lawrence for a couple of years. There's still a lot of work to do to stabilize that property, but there were a lot of reasons why to say yes, especially around my career. That the property I was at in Kansas was garden style, older, in a college town. There's a lot of that across the U.S. That's also similar to Norman, and so this property was mid-rise, lots of commercial. There was a university relationship angle. It was a ground lease, more urban setting. I thought, I don't know much about doing that kind of thing, so this will be complementary to things I'm already learning about. So you should say yes to this and see what you can learn.
Yeah.
So I did. So I moved down there and kind of started over. And I started over my MBA program at TCU, and
Okay.
I finished and got my MBA from TCU. So I got my full degree there, but I had to effectively start over. Even the interview process was like, why do you have some credits from KU, and why are you moving here? And it was a bit
Yeah.
awkward, but the professors understood it's a good job opportunity, and you're moving on. So
Yeah.
um,
That
yeah, so
that's
I think
fantastic.
that was an important move to further diversify the experience and knowledge that I had up to that point.
So it's funny that you mentioned, Christine Richards. She's been part of this, profiles in student housing series, and the number of folks she has impacted, in this industry, and folks that have gone on to do other things. Matt Maxa, which
Yeah.
was started at, I think he started at EDR, but there was obviously that connection. Now he's overseeing article student living, and yeah, I could sit here and quickly, throw out
Oh, it's a huge
Miles
coaching
Worth.
tree.
It
Yeah.
was another one, and yeah, just a lot of folks. She's had a huge impact on her. Her legacy will live on in this industry for decades to come, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, she's OG in student housing, and I think rightfully so that she has a lot of ongoing people in the business, because she, I think, did a really excellent job of being commercially minded, but mentoring people and giving advice and giving people opportunity.
Yeah,
That, and that's something that's carried through with me. There is a balance you have to make. We're all doing a job in a company. We're not nonprofits,
yeah,
and we're supposed to perform. And so we have to be choosing people that are going to perform. But all our sector's chock full of young people that are eager to grow. And so giving those people opportunity, like I was given opportunity when I was ridiculously young. When they first called me up to go to Lawrence to be property manager, I was 22 years old. I mean, some of the students living at the building, many of them probably were older than me.
yeah,
And that, that did have an impact on my ability to be a really good community manager at the time, because there are parents out there, that looked at me and look at people of that age and go, you're just my kid. You're the same age as my student that's living in your building. How can you manage this place?
yeah,
And I can remember my boss telling me at the time what the property was valued at, which was, I think, $15 million. It's not much really in the
yeah,
grand scheme of things compared to what they're worth nowadays. But I remember thinking to myself, my God, that's a lot of responsibility. I'm in charge of like 20 people, and I'm charged of something that's worth so much, and I'm making the decisions around this. But I really took that to heart, and I think that that's something that, for anybody to be successful in student, you really do need to understand that your age doesn't have to be a detractor for you, or experience, but you do have to take it seriously. You got a lot of responsibility. You're running a business,
yeah.
and you're managing people. And for those other people, they might be twice your age, but it's also their livelihood. And they may be local, and they may not have a university degree, and this may be their career. So you got to take care of them too.
Yeah, yeah. So take us past, because I know that was your kind of your last stop with EDR. Or what came
It
next?
was, yeah. I made it really clear to them that when I finished my MBA, I'd been in Fort Worth for 2+ years, nearly 3 years at that point. I wanted to take the next step. I'd been at 3 properties at that point, moved around 3 different states. I wanted to be a regional. I wanted to move up. They were very frank with me and said, "Look, you will be a regional for us, but you just gotta wait your turn, and
Yeah,
we don't have an opening right now for you." And I was open with them. I loved working for EDR. I really enjoyed the culture, and team focused mentality that place had. It was great. So I was upfront with them and said, months before, when I graduate, then I'm gonna look for something that gives me that opportunity to keep growing. And I don't think it's in my DNA to sit for 6, 8 years as a
yeah,
community manager to wait my turn. I need to find that a little bit more on my terms. One of the very few times in my career I've actively, went out and looked for a job, but I did. as I was finishing that up. And oh my goodness, I had a lot of interviews and talked to a lot of people over that period, but the one that stuck and that job I took was an opportunity to move to Seattle, Washington, which was a really big move for me. This was to the West Coast, and it was way away from family. Now you're talking a 5-hour flight from
Yeah.
to go see family, to open up the West Coast markets for CA Ventures, CA Student Living. And at that time, this was just maybe a year or less after they'd sold their big portfolio to ACC. When they were, campus acquisitions, they sold that all off and sort of reincarnated as CA Ventures and CA Student Living.
Mhm.
And so they were only running 1 or 2 properties. Everything else was in development, and there was basically no property management team at that time, because they'd sold the operating company business to ACC with that transaction. Everything left.
Gotcha.
So it was really starting from scratch with some really big growth targets. And that's what attracted me to it. I thought this place is going to need people to know what they're doing. Anybody that knows what they're doing is going to have an outsized impact on their career, because they're going to be valued. And it looks like just gangbusters kind of development coming, lots of growth. So I took a leap of faith and left a very stable sort of granddaddy kind of operating company where there was tried and true policy and procedure for just about everything that could happen, to a
Yeah.
place with literally none. They had nothing, and it was up to us to figure it out and build it all out. So I did that, and within a year I was running not just the properties in Seattle, but everything on the West Coast for them as a regional manager, sort of the West Coast region. So that was a property down in California, and brand new one in Eugene, and a couple in Washington. So it was far from home office. There was really nothing happening on the West Coast except for what I ran. So it was very much sort of like, this is yours. You need to take care of it,
Yeah.
and we're not close by. I joined just before Beth Pinder came into CA around shortly after I joined. Then Maxa, Matt Maxa that you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
he came in a bit later. So Brenna Tucson, who is still at Article with Maxa today, she came in, and we started building this really rock star team. I mean, it was a really great team that was a new experience for me, because these people all came from different companies, exception of quite a heavy dose of EDR. But understandably so, because they've been around so long. There was a good healthy dose of ACC in there as well,
Yeah.
from people that had worked at that company, also understandably so. But all these different backgrounds, different points of view, that's really challenging at times. But because you don't know how to work together, you're figuring it all out.
Right.
But when you're developing, that first year, it was 10 properties coming out of development in 1 year, when you don't really
Mm.
have an operating platform spun up yet. A number of those properties were late. A lot of people listening to this will know that a late delivery is a way to
Good.
forge your team out of titanium, or we'll break it, one of the two.
Yeah.
But you don't normally come through that not sort of having bonded. And so we
Absolutely.
definitely did that first year or two, and became tight knit. And I was only in Seattle for a couple of years, but again, new different kind of markets. That's sort of the last gen type markets, those West Coast urban markets, big city markets that sort of have been the latest to mature in the U.S. and from a student housing perspective. So that
Right.
was even a different flavor for me to see, in different types of student housing. Um, then they asked me to move to Chicago to CA's HQ, home office, and be VP of Ops, and lead not just regional ops, but ops across the U.S. I can't recall exactly how big the portfolio was by then, probably 15,000 beds or something like that about that time. And so again, I said yes. Chicago had never been on my wish list, but moving to the home office always had been. I knew that was really important to move up into the corporate ranks, is to be there. Now, I know it's not, even then it wasn't requirement. Certainly post COVID, it's not a requirement to be, in the home office. But and it's not here in the UK either. But I do think that it unlocks more opportunities for somebody to be there with all the decision makers on a day-to-day
Exactly.
basis.
Exactly. When you're seeing someone face to face, not just in a meeting, but when you're seeing someone face to face as you're, you know, going to the coffee machine or whatever, and you're kind of halfway through some kind of thought, and you run into somebody and you begin sharing that thought, and it brings that team so much closer together. And
Absolutely.
yeah, it was great
Yeah,
that you
it
were.
really is invaluable. And I think in some ways, COVID pushed that reality further away. And I understand the reasons why. And a lot of people don't want to move. But it is really hard if you're an ambitious person really wanting to move up through the ranks. It will make it harder. It doesn't make it impossible, but it will make it harder if you're not there with those people. They call it water cooler talk for a reason. It's in the kitchen over a cup of coffee as you brew it, or
Yeah.
having lunch. If you're not there, you're not ever going to have lunch with those people.
Yeah.
Not except maybe once a quarter when you go, once a year when you go to the office. So I've never been a big city person. I prefer living in the country or small cities. I really love living in Seattle. It's a perfect size city for me. So moving to Chicago, big city, wasn't really something I was thrilled about. But I thought that this is the right move for me, and it's going to give me the opportunity to help that company at the time, still in a huge growth phase at that time. That's really what was necessary to unlock that. Being on the West Coast, 2 hours from everybody else in time zone and far away, that was never going to be possible for me to kind of keep moving up and get
Yeah.
exposure the way I wanted to advance my career if I wasn't there. So I moved over and got settled in Chicago, and we kept growing up into the 20,000 plus bed range during my time there, and had made a couple of small acquisitions as well, but most of it was all development growth. And the group was listening to the operations team's feed-ins to helping them underwrite properties and look at rent growth and not get it wrong, hopefully, so that those assets could perform long term. Which is hard for a developer that's very entrepreneurial to do, that had success doing that for a long time, not having an operations team to listen to.
Yeah.
We cracked open quite a lot of those doors, and our voice was being heard. And around that same time is actually about the time I joined CA, before I even was aware of this, CA had started to develop its international strategy, which was centered initially around South America and initially around Colombia and Chile as two country focus in South America. And I wasn't aware of that until I moved to Chicago. And of course, I became aware of it being there. There were people that were coming in and out from Bogota, Colombia, where the main office was.
Hmm.
And I got to know those people a little bit, but it just wasn't part of the U.S. property management business. It was a different vertical completely.
Yeah.
And so we knew about it, but we didn't know much. And we were busy enough not to stick our nose in it unnecessarily.
Yeah.
But as they began to deliver the first couple of properties, we started hearing that they weren't, the operations piece, the sales, the lease up and stabilization piece wasn't going as well as they had hoped. And so myself and a couple of others were asked to go down to just take a look around and kind of internally consult on, from our perspective, running a large established and mature portfolio at that point, what could they do differently?
Yeah.
What were learnings from the U.S. we could take down there and help these teams there perform better. So we went down. I happily volunteered for that. Who's going to turn down an opportunity to go down for Colombia for a week and see some cool things? At that point, I loved going abroad, so I thought, why not? But of course, up to that point, it had been for short stints and vacations and stuff like that, not
Right.
to
Right.
live. So I went down for a week, and we made our observations and wrote up our findings, sent them back to the bosses when we got back. And I had taken a lead in sort of compiling our thoughts and findings. So again, I think that's important to tell your audience, is like, just because I had a full-time job and I was busy didn't mean it wasn't useful for me to put the time and effort into making that a good piece of work for
Yeah.
the bosses to see. Because what ended up happening is they read all of that and thought it made sense, and then came back a couple months later and say, yeah, it makes sense. Why don't you go do all these things down there that you're suggesting be done?
Well,
And
I've got to think that going to Seattle, and because you made a point of kind of opening up the West Coast region, and I know how hard that has been in student housing,
yeah,
because one, the purpose built stuff, it really, a lot of that really was focused in on at least from a privatized standpoint, was really focused, in the Southeast and that Sun Belt area. And for such a long period of time. And, the developers that were able to get those deals done, they wanted to stay in areas where, because the construction timeline is so, was so tight. They wanted to stay in areas where the weather was very mild and they didn't have to worry about closing down a construction site during the winter. And not that Seattle has a lot of snow, but it's
sure got a lot of rain.
Yeah, but there were a lot of barriers to entry, on the West Coast for a lot of different reasons. And so not only was the product not there, but you also didn't have a lot of folks who had the experience that were either willing to move to the West Coast, or that were already there. Maybe they had an experience in in another market. And so it's, to this day, I still hear from recruiters of, hey, do you know anybody that's willing to move to California or to Portland, or, and that's, I've got to imagine that was good training ground for what was coming next.
In retrospect, yes. I mean, I didn't know where my career was going at that time, but yeah, absolutely. That being over on the West Coast, across all those markets, there was, where there was student housing, there was no off-campus purpose-built student housing in Seattle when we opened our first property in Seattle. The one we opened was the very first one. There was multifam in the U district that was catering to students, and there were, your converted old buildings that were leasing out to students, but purpose-built, very first one. Now you go there, the place is just totally changed. It's so much student housing there now. Eugene was the same way. We weren't the first, but we were in the first wave of developments in that city that were purpose built. And then California, there's still places there's almost no student housing, in a lot of the places in California, purpose built, or very little of it. So yeah, it was a learning experience trying to figure out, how do you staff these properties with people who don't come from this background? Because anywhere else in the student housing space in the US, in these college towns, you can take a leap of faith and hire people in from other sectors, because you've got a stable team around them that come from student housing. Maybe you decide to hire a manager from retail or from multifamily or something else, or hospitality, but the leasing manager and the ACM and the other guys all come from students. So they kind of have this bevy of people around them to help integrate them. But then what do you do if nobody has that experience? And these concepts, even the concept of something like turn, a foreign concept, even if they come from hospitality or multifamily or something, they get it. But we all know that's not the same turn as compressing everything into 10 days.
Yeah. Well, and as a regional manager going into that, it requires so much more from you, because there's not just training on, what buttons to push and, there's a whole concept to student housing, and that has to be communicated and transferred, and they've got to have buy-in, and that takes a lot of time from a regional manager, if they're the only ones with that experience.
Yeah, and so it was useful that I was in the city and in the region. It was very easy for me to get to my other properties. On Alaska Airlines, I could pop down really quickly down to Eugene Airport, or down to California. There were direct flights too, so it was easy for me to get around. And of course, in Seattle, I was there. So when I was in town, I went to the property and worked from the property every day as a regional, just to help provide that guidance there. I try to stay out of the team's hair. I think that's important for regionals. You got to let your teams manage. You can't, step on their toes, but being there and helping keep an eye on things is important. And then I think this was a very useful experience for me. I got to see markets where people didn't quite get the concept of pre-leasing, and you didn't understand what student housing was as a value proposition. And that was certainly the case in Seattle those first few years. People didn't understand, why is it so much more expensive per month? Because they didn't get that, utilities are included, or the amenities and all these things that in an established student housing market like a Tallahassee or even Norman, I mean, that's the whole marketplace. So you are not at a competitive disadvantage, and you've got to sell against preconceived notions and culture as much as you do against your comps. There were no comps, in Seattle to start with. So
Yeah.
it's easier to sell and compete against comps than it is culture, and that's something that when I finally did move to South America was a lesson well learned, but it was much more stark in South America because suddenly it wasn't just the culture of what student housing is and not understanding the concept and why it costs different. It was, why do I need to live away from home? I don't need to do that. Why do I need to live with other students? I can live with my mom and dad and save money.
Yeah.
So the cultural barrier there was so much more intense because you were not just battling against other options while you're away at college, so to speak, quote unquote. You were battling, why do I even need to live anywhere else and waste
Yeah.
money? So
Yeah.
that was good preparation for that. And that was one of the biggest challenges there, is leasing against that culture and trying to convince people why you even mattered to them,
Yeah.
which was a really important learning experience for me, and one of the biggest challenges for me personally, our whole team, and that portfolio.
Yeah. That's something that I think some of the other shifts that we're seeing with Gen Z, I don't want to say there's going to be a return to that, but as affordability becomes, more and more of an issue, and I had an interesting conversation with someone on LinkedIn earlier because we were just discussing, a lot of students that we had a recent podcast discussing students that are deciding to go degree free, and either going directly into the workforce or an internship. I mean, there's a lot of guys and gals that are doing that from an AI perspective because you've got companies like OpenAI that are like, oh yeah, you want to program, like we'll teach you everything you need to know, like
Mm-hmm.
much faster than you can in university. And there becomes that, what part of the podcast was about is that's still a market for student housing properties. Is they're not on campus, but they're still in the same markets. And we should be looking at the enrollment cliff and everything that we're facing. That's certainly a market that you need to be, is your marketing necessarily need to be positioned for them? Probably. I mean, I think that's all depending on the city that you're in and that type of thing. But I think when it comes to being open to to those students and having some programming for, I said students, but and they are still students in a lot of ways.
Aged people. Yeah.
Yeah. And so and it was just kind of amazing talking to this person, the founder of Degree Free, was that a lot of her clients did not realize that student housing was even an option. And here in the States, there's obviously this, this bridge that universities get, they cover the gap on as far as living with mom and dad to, being independent. And in, countries like you were talking about, there's, the universities, I don't think have really played that role. And it's,
That's right.
yeah, it's very interesting.
The more I've developed my knowledge of student housing, I guess university and student interaction with going to university, because there's universities in every country in the world. There isn't purpose-built student housing in every country in the world. There's more and more in a lot of countries. But the more I've learned about how students interact with going to school, higher education, really the US and the UK are outliers. We're the only places that have a really deeply embedded go away to university, go away to college culture.
Yeah.
Australia doesn't have it. In Europe, it's not common. In South America, it's not common. Almost everywhere else in the world, you go to a university usually close in your town you're from. And it's different in a lot of other places in the world, in that across Europe and South America, universities are in cities where all the people live. We're kind of different, that we have college towns.
Yeah.
Right, it's part of the culture of going away to university. But most students aren't like that. They're usually studying at a university in the town that they're from or the city that they're from, and they live at home, or they're married and they're living with their spouse where they are getting a degree. That's what the common situation is across the world, not going away. So, being American, I had the same bias, and I had to learn that that's not the case in a lot of other places. And so then how do you pivot away from that? How do you be successful doing student housing? Well, there's a reason why a lot of student housing in other parts of the world rely on international students, because international students by definition can't live with their family. They are the people that chose to go to a different place to study, and they absolutely need student housing. They have to have something like that. So it's a ready market for those groups. But as we were working in Colombia, it was very apparent that there's not a big international student population in this country because of the history of violence in that country and the politics of it. And what do you do? So it was a big challenge. So we actually had, to the point you were making about the young people that are just going straight to work without a degree but are still college aged. That was a big part of the strategy in Colombia as well. We positioned one property to capture co-living and students, young people, just
Yeah.
generally across the whole spectrum, and marketed to that demographic, because it became clear to us we weren't going to be able to fill this building with just undergrad students. We had to take a broader approach to our marketing campaign.
Yeah.
And it did work.
Yeah. I haven't looked at the numbers for the past year, but there were a couple of South American countries that actually during the COVID years, they actually really flourished as far as with international enrollment, because they weren't locked down. Yeah. And I don't know if that's continued or not. I don't know if you've kept your eye on that or not, but I did think that was interesting that students were still willing to go to another country that may have not been their first choice, but simply because they wanted to leave whatever country they were in.
No, I can't say that I've been following those numbers specifically. I don't doubt that they increased coming out of COVID. A lot of international movements cross-border increased immediately after COVID, or even during COVID. But I think that the number of the denominator, right? The gross number is not that big from any given country, from those countries, because you need a lot of disposable income. You need to be from the wealthy part of society to be able to leave Colombia or Chile and go study abroad. That was also a big challenge for us, and something useful for me to learn, that the U.S., we essentially have a subsidized program. People can get student loans from the government and get in huge debt. I'm not saying this is a good thing at all for them personally.
Please don't.
I had some student debt, especially getting my MBA. I wasn't making enough cash as a community manager to pay for TCU is a private school, so the tuition is particularly high there. So I had to get student loans too. It's not necessarily a good thing for the individual. It is a great thing for the student housing sector, because there's a lot of student loan money that pays a lot of rent and a lot of properties for a lot of owners across the U.S. Most countries aren't like that, and can't rely on that to bolster and underpin a private real estate market, basically. So in Colombia, it was very clear that the local population, if you could convince them to want to or need to live in your building, their buying power might be $100 a month or something, and we needed to get 5 times that, to make our pro forma. So you were limiting yourself in that kind of situation to the rich kids, the kids from the upper strata of society. And then a challenge of those students is that those students have enough money to go study in the U.S. or in the U.K. or somewhere in Spain, and at a very elite college. So why would they need your product to stay in town? They probably didn't. There were a lot of layers of challenges there that provided great learning opportunities for me and my time there. So I was there for a couple of years, and I knew that the plan for CA was to go and build a platform and portfolio in the UK, and I knew that.
Yeah, because I think at the same time you're in South America, they're sending Nick Hill off to the UK to kind of get things started. And we've had Nick on the podcast before, and he's he definitely enjoyed that experience. But you end up, I don't know if you came in after he left.
We overlapped a little bit, maybe 9 months or something like that. So he went so I moved to Colombia. He moved to London a bit after I moved to Colombia, maybe a year later. And then I moved on to London, and we overlapped a little bit, maybe like 9 months, a year, something like that.
Yeah.
But we worked in the same office for a little while. Of course, we had worked in Chicago together, so I knew
Yeah.
Nick really well by that point already. I moved to London to get us kickstarted. CA had opened a property in Poland, and I had started managing that from Bogota, Colombia, which was
Oh, okay.
really, really tricky. And I didn't mention when I was in Colombia, we had,
So you're used to 3 a.m. phone
it
calls.
was crazy. I was already back and forth to Santiago, Chile every month. And that, a lot of people don't realize this. That's a 6 hour flight. It's one end of the continent to the other, north to south. It's a
Yeah.
long way off. So I was back and forth. And then I introduced flying to Krakow, Poland, maybe every couple of months, which was in travel time from Bogota. You couldn't fly direct. So, I mean, it was like 20-hour flight time to get there. It was crazy.
Now,
So
when you were
it,
on these flights, did you ever go back and think, when you were in that leasing and marketing manager back in Norman, that this career would have you going between
Yeah,
Poland
no,
and
I was
Chile?
constantly pinching myself thinking this is crazy. And I actually had a really, really directly relevant experience when I was getting my MBA at TCU. So I was still a community manager at that time. They encouraged students to do it was just only a week or 2 week long summer study abroad business led program. So it wasn't your typical like semester abroad or anything like that, which I didn't do as an undergrad, and I didn't have enough money to do it. But I always wish I had. But I got the opportunity to do it during my MBA, and I took 2 trips in that program, and one of them was to go to Chile. And so I'd already been to Chile, and I directly remember going there and thinking, how cool would it be to be able to have a job like these expats that I'm meeting, because
Yeah.
it was a business trip. So we went and met Microsoft Chile and the mining company there, and I think we went to EY or Deloitte or something like that. So we
Yeah.
were meeting Americans, and they were talking about their experience living abroad, and I thought, wow, this is so glamorous. This is so cool. I wish I could do this someday. So then, fast forward a few more years, and I'm flying to Santiago, the same city, as an expat, doing the
Yeah.
same thing. So it was very much sort of a pinch me, like, this is cool. This is something I thought would be awesome to do, but really didn't have any way to see how it could be possible for me.
Yeah.
And here I am doing it. So it is possible for anybody listening. You just have to, you have to take opportunities that lead you that direction. But it's been a very kind of windy path. And as I lay it out, it seems so obvious, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3. But I could have never designed this,
Yeah.
from a forward thinking perspective. I just waited for a door to open, and it was always a zig or a zag. And I took the zig or zag, and it leads you a direction. It wasn't that I took every opportunity that arose. I don't want anybody listening to get the wrong idea. Like, there are times you need to say no and be quite disciplined and deliberate about what you do say yes to. But if it's an opportunity that's a bigger role that you're sufficiently ready for, that you do know your current role well, so you're ready for the next step, and it's a different kind of role with maybe it's the same role, but it's a different asset class or a different type of property, garden style to urban. If you can keep growing by taking that step, I really encourage people to take it. Moving is really personally hard, and so I understand why a lot of people don't want to move around a lot, and it does require a lot of sacrifices. But it can be really powerful to unlocking career opportunities. It's not forever. Even today, I intend to move back to the U.S. at some point, and probably live or at least spend a lot of time in Oklahoma at some point. And I could do that tomorrow if I wanted to. It's no problem. I could get on a flight and move home, and then no doubt I could get a pretty good job if Mapletree wouldn't have me working from rural Oklahoma. That probably wouldn't work, but I know I could. So the more experience you get through these experiences that you take and you give yourself exposure to, the more valuable you are. Then you have opportunities to go back, and if it's not for you, you just go back and do something different. And that's something that was hard for me to get past when I was considering, do I move abroad? Because I knew, I talked to my partner at the time, and I said, look, my career path with CA Ventures as a key member of the leadership team of CA Student Living running the US team, they're not going to hold my job open. They're going to fill it, and they're going to move on.
Yeah.
The door is closed for me in that role on that path. If I do this, is it worth it? And the answer was, yeah, that door will be closed and a lot more will open.
Yeah.
So it's okay. And I take
Yeah.
that risk.
Yeah. Yeah. Being open to those opportunities, obviously always kind of really seeking out how you can help the company that you're working with.
Yeah.
All of that puts you into that position to get to London.
Yep.
All of that was on the operations side.
All,
You're
all, all ops. Though I will say in Colombia for the first time, every single asset had a board, had
Yeah.
a much more formal structure than we're used to seeing. So and there was no asset management team really involved in running those properties either. So while it was ops, I also really was essentially doing asset management too,
hmm
and needed to go to every board meeting, excuse me, and represent asset management and ops, and really, alongside the CA people who were on the board, from the investment side, sit with them. I had more to say in most cases than they did in a lot of ways. So it was ops, but it started to give me exposure, just because of the nature of it, to to a bigger picture and the ownership side of things, as opposed to strictly ops, or at least answering to a board. So I think that was formative for me to learn more about that side, and so that leads me on to getting settled in London, and that was a few weeks before COVID closed everything down. So in retrospect, I'm again quite lucky that I got settled there, found a flat to live in, got
mm,
moved in, and then about 2 weeks later, the world closed. And so trying to move in that process would have been really difficult. So
yeah.
I'm lucky that I got settled. It was also an interesting period and quite good for us. I think the task was build an operating platform from scratch. There was absolutely nothing. There were no operating assets. There was no nothing, and that's what Nick had been working on already,
Yeah.
especially on the sales and marketing side, and assisting on underwriting the properties that were being evaluated for acquisition, the land sites. But that really got underway. And like, what's the brand going to be called, and what are the policies going to be? What system are you going to use? Let's get to work implementing the systems. Some properties were just getting started with construction when I moved there, so we knew the timeline. We had 2 years less than, you had to have all this going before. It was a bit good to have quiet time during COVID to work through these things that are just very involved tasks. You've got to write policy, and you've got to set up systems, and hire a bunch of people during COVID, and and then start leasing properties up in the middle of COVID when you as a group have never done it together before. So there were a lot of challenges, like each of the step had been, but this was a whole new one. Like, this was a new country. This was building a team that were almost entirely local people. Really, aside from in the sales, marketing, ops, property management team, Nick and I were the only Americans sent over. So
Yeah.
everybody else that we hired were local people, which is the right thing to do. Absolutely, you should hire from the local sector. They have more expertise doing what we're trying to do than we did,
Yeah.
in the UK. So we built a really great team and opened those first properties through that period. But another huge learning experience, because the fundamentals are the same everywhere. And that's sort of a theory about student housing that I developed in South America, that, there are a lot of differences in how you market to people, what product you're selling, how you manage the staff, where you recruit from, and culturally how the students interact with the property are quite different too. But the fundamentals are all the same. And I was able to sort of develop that worldview then, that you still have to provide good customer service, and it's grounded in the same kind of concepts. And the annual cycle is similar pretty much anywhere you go, though you might have to do two turns, and you might have two equal sized move-ins. But the theory of how you do it and how important each of those steps is doesn't change. You still got to have lean, empowered teams on site that know what they're doing, because it can't be hospitality. It can't have 100 people working at that property.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
can't. The P&L doesn't support it. The rents don't support it. Daily rates in a hotel are just so much higher than daily rates in a long stay apartment. So all these fundamentals also apply to the UK too. So I was able to I think I benefited from being in Colombia first, sort of getting all those American biases, maybe American arrogance, I can say. I don't know if your audience wants to hear that, but we do tend to think the world revolves around us sometimes. And it's different country to country. So I think that experience for me, learning how different it can be, helped me in Europe settle in faster, because I'd already kind of
Yeah.
gotten that washed through my system.
Yeah.
that it's going to be different. Let the locals tell you how it is.
Yeah. Explain some of those differences. I mean, obviously, everybody in Europe, refers to it as PBSA or purpose built student
Yeah.
accommodations versus here it's PBSH, purpose built student housing. Honestly, I think accommodations is probably a more appropriate word for what we do. But there's also there's a heavy use of agents or
Yeah.
folks that platforms that kind of like your booking.com and things like that we see in the hospitality arena here in the US. In my experience, and I've been to London, interviewed several operators, and there's specifically in London, there's a much more centralized type of operation versus what you may see as a property operating with its own staff and maintenance staff and everything else. There's definitely that component. You go into a building and a PBSA building in London, and you may run across a den mother type person, but you're not necessarily going to see a full leasing staff. There's those differences, but what are
There's a
some
lot
other
of
differences?
variability though. You do find that for sure, but there's a lot, especially the newer higher end stuff are
Right.
staffed almost the same as you see in the US. Same numbers at least. Leasing and marketing managers, like a dedicated leasing manager, that is still uncommon, but you tend to have another one or two managers that effectively do that job because you still give tours on site, you still manage your leads on site in most cases, not all. There
Mhm.
is a lot of variability, and so what you've seen is true. It exists, but there are
And
also a lot of
that was
buildings.
more specifically in London. That didn't
Yeah,
happen out in
well,
the
same is true in London and across all the regions. You can find the whole gamut. Yeah, I'll touch on some of the differences. So this is one. There it is absolutely, as you say, more centralized here. As a rule, it's more centralized here, but it is a range. Some groups are really leaned into that, and they centralize just almost everything from facilities management to sales. But a lot of groups don't do that, and certainly the operator we have, it's more centralized than a U.S. operator would be, but only slightly. We still want most of budget management handled by the on-site manager. We want most of the sales, at least the lead management, happening on site. A lot fewer tours because there are a lot more international students here. So a lot of people are leasing from abroad. But curating those relationships and having those conversations and those virtual tours, all that kind of stuff, it's very common here too. So there's still a lot
Gotcha.
of that still happens. The rents are quoted in weeks here, which is not
Yeah.
really that big a fundamental difference. It's just a cosmetic difference for the most part, but
But they're not
it
collected
trips
on a
people up.
weekly. They're not collected on a weekly basis. It's still
They're
on
not.
a monthly
No, it's
installment.
billed on a monthly basis. It's just converted. There's just a legacy of how rental apartments have been quoted here in the UK for probably hundreds of years, and it's just a legacy bleed over from that. It's just more about how it's quoted,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's converted to monthly and then billed monthly and paid monthly. So it's not that different in that regard. They're not nearly as robust ecosystem of systems here, so it operates a bit more like what student housing in the U.S. was maybe 20 years ago, or maybe even
Mm,
older than that, where there's a lot more manual work to be done. Not all the systems are integrated; they don't all talk to each other, so you might have to have more back office people. That makes it in some ways a little bit more inefficient than what a lot of American operators would be used to seeing. And it's just a newer sector generally. So where you have all this ecosystem of all these suppliers that integrate into your systems to either help you run the property, give you insights into the property, or help you drive ancillary revenue by selling further services. Really, there's no such ecosystem in the UK. So it's still really like bare bones, pure student housing with very little other things going on than just selling a rent and then managing the tenant and their experience living in your building. It's more prototypical student housing. You mentioned the term student accommodation. Really, a lot of people here say student housing also. Everybody knows what it
okay.
means. Half the market uses it, other half will use student accommodation. It's all kind of just interchangeable. So again, cosmetically, it looks a little different, but not too different. There are no pools, almost by rule. There are no pools or spas or saunas here. There are a lot of highly amenitized buildings and buildings that could go toe to toe with a lot of American student housing buildings. Most anything that's been built recently looks amazing, but the arms race of amenity has never really come to the UK. It's really good gyms, study areas, game rooms, cinema rooms, maybe, though that's trending away and not as big a theme as it used to be. Karaoke rooms have always been really popular here to put in because of the Chinese international student demographic that's so big. They love that kind of thing. But it mostly stops there. Outdoor terraces, maybe, but we get pretty bad weather in most of the year across the UK. So anything outdoor is lesser. And there's not very much outdoor amenity because mostly these are not large parcels that student housing
Right.
is on. They're almost always urban, whether it's small city, big city, they're usually on a small site. So, no garden style for the most part across the UK. So there are certainly differences. I think that there's a much bigger focus on health and safety and compliance and preventive maintenance than in the US. In fact, I'm trying to bring some of these learnings back to our US portfolio and instill some of these things because I think we have a lot to learn from the UK in how we manage these buildings.
That was the other question I wanted to ask you. I mean, we've got Yugo is now operating in the U.S. They just had their big acquisition with Campus Advantage, and Mapletree and other investment groups. Or maybe they've had a little bit more of a footprint in Europe, and they're now coming to the U.S. or vice versa. So I know when that happens, there's going to be this all ships rise kind of thing, and there's going to be
We're hoping so.
Yeah, there's going to be this using best practices or exchange of best practices. What do you think some of those, be it prop tech, be it just regular MOs that are happening, on sites? What do you see, the next 5-10 years as that mixing pot begins to happen? Especially from an investment standpoint. What kind of things do you think will be traded between the two continents?
Well, I was just touching on one, and I absolutely think that the U.S. is ripe for prioritizing preventive maintenance and facilities management, and maybe doing it more centrally. Every operator in the U.S. has regional facilities people, regional maintenance managers, that sort of thing. But it's nothing compared to the approach of UK student housing. And UK student housing, some operators take it too seriously because it's too pastoral, too university-like, too focused on making everything perfectly safe at all times. But that's a bygone era even here. The operators are loosening up and understanding that this is private off campus, but they've never loosened up on the quality, the standard of risk mitigation, risk management, avoiding incidents, avoiding accidents, avoiding things that can happen like floods and things like that in the building is at a much higher standard in the UK. And I can see it comparing my portfolio in the US versus the UK, how that reduces loss risk to us and insurance claims and dislocated residents and liability issues. That if there's a better focus on it, there are better outcomes, less loss, less downtime, less potential litigation. And honestly, I think that the U.S. needs to do better in formalizing this and making facilities and preventive focus more of an issue. And it has to be done centrally. And I don't mean entirely centrally. You got to rely on your maintenance teams on site to do the bulk of the actual work, but you got to really robustly oversee and manage it centrally and track it centrally. So then the next point is I really think that a nice middle ground between the US way of doing things in a very decentralized manner and the UK way of doing things, which is much more centralized, somewhere in the middle, depending on the actual function, is probably the most optimal way. Because the US, this, Wes, we're talking to a lot of people that work on site. Probably the people listening to this podcast are the rock stars at site level, but they all got comps in their market that they know that comp is poorly managed by a not very good management team.
Right.
And when that happens, property performance just is out the window. You cannot make it work if you've got a bad team on site because we're so reliant on our on-site teams in every aspect. In the UK, you can have bad teams and assets can still perform because there's more connectivity to the central organization to support it, even if something bad is happening or there's a vacancy on site.
Yeah.
And I think that some middle ground between heavy centralization and complete decentralization is probably the right way to do it. So I think that's something that will start to become more of a theme. I don't think it's going to go so far as sort of platform branding. Yugo has played with that a little bit and is using their brand everywhere in the world. But they still keep a strong property identity for each of their property names. And I think the U.S. is just so big geographically and so disconnected. And universities have a strong identity pulse themselves, right? We talked about my love for OU football and things like that earlier. It's not like that in most other places in the world. And so
Right.
operators in the UK really heavily lean into their brand, but they're not really big brands in the collegiate experience in students' face in the UK. And there's not nearly as strong a tie to your alma mater where you go to or went to school in the UK either. So I think there's more space for really strong brands in student housing here than in the US, and I'm not sure it will ever work the same way because one, you might have properties that are 2,000 miles apart in the US, but also you're competing against really strong identities locally as well. So I'm not sure it will ever really take off here, but I think there'll be more groups that play with it and try to make it work like Hugo's doing. I really, this is maybe a controversial thing. What we didn't talk about that the UK market really heavily relies on international students. Lots of countries do, but some 30+% of the total student population in the UK is not from the UK. They're studying here internationally. You compare that to something like 6% in the US, so it's a dramatic difference.
Yeah.
So there are many, 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 many student housing buildings in the UK that are most, I would say, are majority international student. Many are heavily dominated by international students, like 70, 80, 90% international student. So,
which is another reason for that reliance on the marketplace or the agents that are.
You really have to. It has become very extreme in the last couple of years, where the agents have almost a lock on the international student marketplace. So we do have to pay agent fees to those agents in the markets where they're heavily competitive. And it's a large driver of marketing expense here. But those students are they have to live in student housing effectively, and they often come with bigger budgets than domestic students in the UK. So they really have driven the rents up and support a robust rent growth profile historically the last few years. But I do think that as post-COVID enrollment booms from international students kind of comes down a little bit, it has been softening a bit. I think that this is a learning from the U.S. and how to pivot and be able to capture and service a more domestic student portfolio without reliance on the agents. That's just and it's not like some groups don't do that here. If you're a more affordable oriented owner operator, you're going to have a lot more domestic students in your portfolio, and the same ways that you attract those students is it's the same as the U.S. Good reputation scores, good marketing campaigns, good renewal campaigns. They are universals, and they work just like they do in the UK, like they do in the US.
So, I could spend all day kind of talking about some of those differences, and I don't know the next time you're coming to the States and, for a conference or whatever, but I'd love to sit down with you and just, talk about some of the things from a legislative standpoint that are happening, specifically in the UK. I know Ireland recently, changed some things legislatively to where landlords have to offer them, was it like a 40-week?
Yeah, so basically like an academic, the equivalent of a 9 or 10 month lease in the U.S. Yeah, they have to.
Yeah, which I've got to imagine the lenders were like
control rule there. Yeah, so it's tough to do student housing now. New student housing is tough to build new there because of these rules.
Yeah. So I'd love to get
Wes. There's a lot of differences like that. There's stuff. I'd be happy to sit down and go through that with you because there's a law going through Parliament here for England and Wales that will be pretty disruptive. Just yesterday, it was announced that there's a rent control bill going through the Scottish Parliament, but they've exempted student housing from it. Thank goodness. But there's lots of stuff like that are quite different than different in some ways and similar to some of the West Coast markets that have rent control
Yeah.
in place. So there are differences and nuances, but I'd be happy to talk through that sometimes.
Let's pause on that for just a second, and just maybe you've got a resource or something that you could provide. Maybe there's a US based equity group that's listening to this, or maybe even an operator that's looking to expand. What's a good resource for them to kind of really stay up to date on? Because here we have the National Multi-Housing Council that keeps us abreast of those things. What's a good resource for them to plug into?
There's a couple of different ways they could go from probably sort of advocacy and thought leadership. I'd say the British Property Federation is probably the NAA equivalent, I suppose, that's going to be lobbying the government. It's multi-sector though. It's not just focused on student housing, but that'd be a good one that's UK focused. Another really excellent organization is called the Class Foundation.
Yes, yeah.
And they focus on
They just finished up
Europe
with their
approach.
conference, right? Their annual summit.
They have it in November of each year. It's
Okay.
coming up, and they do mini conferences, regional events all through the year. So they just had one in France. They had one in London in the summer. So they pop around to different geographies, but they cover UK and Pan Europe student housing. They're a charity. They do great conferences that would be great learning experiences for any groups that want to learn the European market if they're thinking about entering. But they also have been focused on doing national housing action plans and lobbying the government and helping the government design working committees to develop student housing. This is less of an issue in the UK that has a really robust student housing industry, but most of the other European countries are just starting to have a mature or nascent even student housing sector. And the governments actually need input in how to devise regulations, maybe. Most European countries will eventually regulate most things. They're willing to regulate. So you want to be in the room while they're writing those, as opposed to on the outside. But it's less about that and more about everybody knows there's more housing needed. There's a housing crisis across most countries in Europe, and it's not focused around students, but students tie into it because they take apartments and homes away from families that they're otherwise living in. So it does tie in. So that group really is focused on trying to devise a strategy that unlocks development opportunities across Europe. So for groups that want to be doing that, that would be a good one. But their conference is good for operations, investment, multi-country, great. And there are some groups in Europe that also are data providers, a lot like College Houses in the US. StuRents is one, Student Crowd's another, Bonard. There's a list of companies that would be happy to help out, and they have their own events series as well and subscription packages. So there's quite a few different ways they could come at it. What is missing though, there is no equivalent to Interface. One biggest and baddest of single annual events. Class Foundation is probably the closest thing that gets to that, but it's not quite as definitive of a thing as Interface is, or even in MHC. It's not quite as centralized here, but that's understandable because it's many countries.
Thanks for sharing that. We'll make sure to get some links to those resources as well and put those in the show notes. So, we talked a little bit about what you're doing, from a day-to-day perspective with Mapletree, but we haven't quite got to that, kind of transition from, what you were doing at CA to now moving into your position at Mapletree. You want to share a little bit about how that happened?
It was, one of the few other times, really the only second time that I've actively gone out and decided I was ready to move on from an organization I'd been with. So I was at EDR for 8 years. I was at CA Ventures for 9 years. And so each time I sort of deliberately said, okay, now is the time to make a choice. Made it known to some of the contacts in the industry that I was ready for the next opportunity, and a few came my way via recruiters. And so I think curating that network with recruiters and having established relationships with them is really important, especially as you start to move up in a business. And when they write you or call you, say, are you interested in hearing about this? My default is generally to say yes, like listen. And you can quickly say, not for me, not right now, I'm happy. And I had that response many times to my careers. Thanks for telling me about that. But now I what I've got going on is super exciting. When you're ready to move on, then they're there, they're there and it's a good contact and you got that connection. So that's exactly what happened. There were a number of opportunities that came up, and Mapletree is the one that stuck. And so I decided to take that chance and and moved again something hugely different, much wider remit in my role here, way beyond just property management. I had evolved in the UK at CA to what it was effectively like a COO type role for the European business. I was doing more than just day-to-day property management. I was also managing HR and the IT function and other things like that. So that
Man of
eased
many
my
hats.
my transition, but Mapletree is something totally different, right? In US dollar terms, the group today is managing assets worth about something like 60 billion in
Wow.
total assets globally. It's just a huge company. And it's also linked through its shareholder to the government of Singapore. So we're a wholly owned company owned by Temasek, and Temasek is wholly owned by the Ministry of Finance of Singapore. So it's directly related. So governance is really, really important. Policy and procedure really important. A lot of structure, and a lot of different divisions. And it's based in Singapore. So I think my first year here I flew to Singapore something like 10 times or something like that in a
Mm.
year. And I still go 6 or 8 times a year for board meetings and investment committees and things like that. So wow, it's been different. Leveraging my experience on how to operate student housing has been beneficial to the group because that's not something they have a lot of experience doing. In fact, before I
Yeah.
joined, they'd never operated any assets before, just asset managed them as an owner. And we bought an operator in the UK and had been slowly integrating them to our business. They manage most of our beds here now, but really, my experience has been greatly beneficial to nurture that transition into being a self operator, which is our ambition to do within the student housing sector, globally eventually, when we can do that anywhere we have student housing beds, to be an owner operator. That's not where my job ends, right? I oversee asset management everywhere we have student housing. We have a closed-end fund, so I've got to make sure that that's being managed well, and that the fund management piece is done well, and investment and divestment work. So that's something that I'd never been responsible for, but had always been around. Having worked for CA as a developer, everything was an investment,
Yeah.
and so the concepts aren't new, but being in charge of it is
Yeah.
certainly new for me. And the strategy piece is the piece that I think that has been the most rewarding, in that it's formulation of places to go, where to do investments, which ones should we target, which ones should we not, how should we approach a divestment program where we need to sell properties. Not been a great year for buying and selling properties, or last 2 years, not an easy time to be buying and selling properties in student housing or any kind of real estate anywhere in the world. It's been tough since interest rates have gone up and cap rates have moved out. So great learning experience. Mapletree has a huge amount of incredibly smart people working in all its regional offices, but especially in Singapore. So it's been excellent being around that kind of corporate and very highly skilled environment to absorb and learn. Learning is what makes all this fun. Student housing is inherently a little bit fun because it's tied to college and our
Yeah.
youth and football teams and your experience going through that. But it's also new every year. It's a little bit the same because it's cyclical, but it's also new, and new themes and new
Yeah.
trends emerge, and you got to stay on top of them to be successful. But I really think that that's one of the reasons why I like student housing, is because you can constantly be learning new things.
It's been, in the time frame that you and I have come through, um, there was a lot of opportunity, right? A lot of it was positioning, from a perfect placement, perfect time kind of thing of being a part of that growth. Has certainly allowed some incredible opportunities for folks that are our age. I'm a little bit older than you, but for both millennials and Gen Xers, it's created some enormous opportunities. So I want to talk a little bit and just ask you really quick, for that younger millennial or Gen Zer that is 4 or 5 years into this career. Maybe they're a property manager somewhere. Maybe they're serving in some kind of op support, portfolio support position. And we've touched on this, but I'd like for you just kind of summarize it and give maybe 3 or 4 bullet points of what is it if they're looking to kind of take a similar path, because the path is a little bit different now. It's certainly more paved than what it was, but there's traffic on it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What are some things you would highlight for them to, make sure that they're doing?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I'd say be open-minded at all times. Don't have preconceived notions about what the next job you want, what it should be, and where it should be. There's not really any one of my career steps that I could have anticipated. And if you'd made me guess at the time what my next thing would be, I don't think it would have been like in my top five. I do see this sometimes with younger people. They're fixated on what the next thing will be. When you're early in your career, my next job is I'm going to move to the head office and I'm going to be doing this job. That might happen, and great if it does. But what if the opportunity is something different than that? Are you just going to say
Yeah.
no by default because you've made your mind up? So I think open-mindedness about that. I think
Yeah.
being willing to take calculated risks, probably the most important thing. It's not wild risks. Don't take anything that ever opens up just because it opens up. Think about what that might lead to. All right. Is it the direction you want to be going? That was something I think that I focused on. It's like this may not have been what I anticipated, but it's the direction I wanted to go generally, or that I could see liking it going in.
Yeah.
So I'll take that direction. But it doesn't come without risks, and at times maybe some downsides. That when you do uproot yourself and move around a lot, it's harder to make personal connections and maintain friendships and see your family. There's downsides to it. So it's a balancing of what is ultimately most important to people as a priority. If your career is and progressing through it is super important to you, and you have the ability to set aside some of those other things temporarily, then that's a good way to think about calculated risk about what you do and what you take. Maybe the third thing I'd say is just make sure you're performing. I think a lot of people that I've observed and given advice to are good at their jobs, but they maybe are trying to move too fast and they don't develop expertise in what they're doing and
Mm.
truly become a valued high performer before they want to move on to the next thing.
Well, and know how
And
to
I
measure that performance too, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So many times, I'll ask someone, well, what did they do, and they start going through actions that they've done that week or that month or that year, but they don't put that back into how much more money did you bring to the property or save the
exactly.
property or so. I think
You've
that's
got
a
to. I think every person in and this is not a universal thing, but for student housing is certainly true. Every role you're working in a business and in an investment. It's both a business and an investment, and you have to somehow be contributing to bettering the business and the investment. It might not be translating in dollars and cents in the bottom line, and not every role I ever had where the numbers just always like huge pluses, big green numbers,
yeah,
but sometimes it's mitigating downside. If you're running a property in a really tough market, limiting the downside to the owner is going to be seen as a win. You'll get noticed for that too. But I really think that you're right. It's not the what I've done. It's how that matters with
yeah,
with what this with what the business is trying to achieve or what the property is trying to do for the owner, et cetera. And I really think, to drive that point home, I never sought to like toot my horn or try to get noticed. I just worked hard, really hard, and tried to do it without an agenda and let that speak for itself.
yeah,
And I got noticed for it. And so I might have been lucky in some regard that I had people that were willing to look for talent at some companies. And that's not always going to be the case. You may have people that are less inclined to help push up junior people in the business. But I think in student housing, that's pretty common for people to want to pull people up from the junior ranks and promote them. I think what most of us in leadership positions just look for is to like, are these grinders that are just trying to do the best job they can do and they're doing it? Then that's the person I want on the team.
yeah,
Effort and commitment are worth more than working knowledge. You can train working knowledge, especially in management positions,
yeah.
which is sort of the route I came up was a more generalist management route, right? Like through property management up through the ranks. I never had to be an accountant. I didn't need to be a development manager with certain technical experience, expertise. I think those
Well,
of us that came up through the ranks or intend to this way, you don't have to be a technician. You just need to be committed and smart and a business person and focused on outcomes.
yeah, no, that's key. And I mean, that's one of the reasons I chose, property management. Because I did outside of student housing, I did spend a couple of years in commercial real estate with both retail and office spaces. And that I remember, really getting to understand what a generalist was. You know a little about a lot, but not a whole lot about one little thing. And that's where I thrived. I loved it.
Yeah.
And if you find yourself being that person that's half IT, half HR, during your day, and you like doing that, this is a perfect it's a perfect career for you. Well, hey, I don't want to end things up without asking you, hey, what's ahead for maybe yourself personally, and certainly with Mapletree in the coming year. Anything you want to share?
We're just still trying to grow the business. I committed to our main board in Singapore that I was going to help us nearly double the size of our assets under management from when I started a couple of years ago when we kicked off our most recent sort of 5-year sprint that we do. We got a lot of growth to do to hit that target, but we've got to grow the business a lot. That's going to have to come in the U.S. as well as other regions. We've been busy buying our first property in Australia the last couple of months, so that's exciting for us. We're going to need to do more work in the UK, and we want to enter continental Europe, ideally through Spain. So there's lots of cool stuff happening here at Mapletree, but it also touches the US. We have quite a few beds there. We got to have more. We need to be looking for opportunities to grow that platform. And like I mentioned, we have ambition to self-operate really everywhere eventually. So that's something that we're working on as well. We've relocated the primary hub for our operations in the U.S. to Dallas, Fort Worth area. So
Okay.
they've kind of been scattered out a bit between the West Coast and the East Coast before. So I think that was a really fundamental thing that we've just completed this year to kind of have a more central hub and in a place that is deeply rooted in student housing,
Yeah.
a deep talent pool. So as we continue to grow, we'll need to hire more people and hopefully tap into that DFW talent pool.
Yeah. No, that's exciting to hear, and looking forward to hearing more about that. Listen, Matt, I appreciate it. You've given us so much time, and I think there's some folks that are listening to this in the audience that this probably clarifies a lot of things that maybe they're thinking about doing. If nothing else, it has really broadened their horizon to how big this industry is, and the type of things that folks can accomplish if they really want to be open to the opportunities. So thanks so much, and I'm really looking forward next time you're in the States, or maybe I'll come to the UK sometime soon.
Yeah, come on over. We'll show you around. I'll show you some of these properties that have full staffs and do a lot of cool stuff at site. We've got some amazing properties here, but I'll definitely be over for Interface in April, probably a few times before that too, in the Dallas area. So,
Well, great. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
all right, thanks so much, Wes.
Thanks. Well, again, a big thanks to Matt for the time that he gave us. I certainly gained that interview was a lot of fun, but I really gained a lot of insight into some of the things that he mentioned, and I'm really excited about the future for Mapletree and them setting up base in Texas, and what that's going to mean for the company and for the industry at large. So looking forward to seeing great things from Matt and his team at Mapletree. Well, guys, I want to go over just a few events that are coming up. Make sure that you've got it on your calendar. First of all the industry events we post on our, especially if they're in the U.S. or in Canada. We also have a couple of things that are coming up in the UK that we've got listed as well. But you can go to our website, studenthousinginsight.com, and go to the events tab, and you'll see a list of industry events there, including a lot of things that Student Housing Insight hosts as well. So please make sure that you go there and do that. You can also join our SHI community. That's our online community where you can become a member. Nothing doesn't cost anything to join, and specifically with the community, that's an area for you to obviously network virtually with your colleagues in the industry. And there's a lot of great data and things that we share there as well. So make sure you check that out. But going back to events, when this is coming out, we've got probably a week or so before or after this episode will come out, we will all be in Scottsdale, Arizona for the NMHC Student Housing Conference. So if you're listening to this beforehand and for some reason it wasn't on your radar, you can again check that out on our page. We're also going to be hosting a Top Golf Mixer. That's our 3rd annual Top Golf Mixer that we'll be doing at NMHC. So you can get information on that. Hopefully we still have some spots available by the time this comes out, that if you're going to be there and you want to be a part of it, hopefully we still have some spots available. But moving on, I wanted to talk about what's happening at the end of the year and an event that I play a big part in, helping Interface and France Media host the LeaseCon TurnCon conference. That is going to be December 8th and 9th in Charlotte, North Carolina. And if you are site level to even C-suite, but especially in that portfolio operations and portfolio support type of positions, this is a perfect conference for you to get to as we kind of talk about what's happened the first half of the leasing season for 25-26, and how that's going to extend into the spring semester of 26. And so great information, preliminary information that we go over and talk about on the panels there. We've got regional marketing roundtables that are a huge benefit to folks who are trying to understand from from a geographic region standpoint, what's happening in those markets. So a lot of great content. We also it is called LeaseCon TurnCon because it is there's a good portion of the focus that is put on turn operations and preparing for turn this coming summer. So if you're involved in any way, no matter how big your portfolio is, if you're on a single property, if you're overseeing an entire portfolio, this is just a fantastic opportunity to come together with your colleagues in the industry and talk about what's happening. So again, that's on our website on the events page. You can get more information there. We will also be hosting our end of year mixer on December 8th at the event. So if even if you're not attending the event, but you're going to be in the Charlotte area on December 8th, would love if you're involved with the operations of student housing, would love for you to be a part of that. Again, all of that's at our events page on our website. So go check that out. Well, guys, thanks so much. Again, I want to mention Shop Talk. You get more info at shoptalk.info. But if you are not registered to receive our monthly invites for that, make sure you go there and register and have your colleagues register as well. Well, thanks, everyone. And again, big thanks to Matthew, as well as our sponsor for this episode. We'll talk to you soon.